Welcome back to Bottom Line with Bob and Kendel Ehrlich. Here we are in episode 13.
And this time we are being technologically challenged because I am in Blue State, Maryland.
And I am in Red State, Florida.
With number one son.
Mask at the gym.
And number one son is with you, and number two son is with me. And we will all be together this coming Friday, at least, or at least three of the four of us. So last week we talked about the 100-day marker, which is the traditional threshold to judge a new administration, at least make some observations. Obviously, 100 days is only 100 days, but the press, the media, the pundits love to zero in, focus in on that particular marker. We talked about the issues that have emerged during the Biden era. This week, we want to go next level with regard to not just the issues, but the themes that accompany those issues, those issue positions adopted by what is proving to be a very progressive national administration. And babe, so I have a list here we both came up with, and I shared at least my themes with you last night. The first is the mask as a cultural marker. We talked a little bit about this last week, and it's so much on my mind. I just did my daily Wawa trip, and the Kendel and the boys know what that means. My mom is in a facility, a memory facility, a block down the road, and every afternoon I stop my work and I deliver Wawa coffee. I can't give it to her in person these days because of the pandemic, but I give it to staff and they give it to her, and they tell me she looks forward to it every day. So I do my daily Wawa stop. But today, as I walked out, it just hit me. The first thing I did, split second, was remove my mask. And I saw others leaving with their masks on outside, which led to a follow-up concerning what we observed last week. We're getting to the point almost where you can predict fairly reliably someone's political party, political posture, if you will, as a function of their mask wearing. And you've observed this as well. I'm sure you see it in Florida. It's on our minds. Right now, the authoritarian left appears to be willing, despite what the science is showing us and telling us concerning outdoor mask wearing, i.e. no longer have to do it. There's an emergence of a permanent mask wearing notion. We talked a little bit last week about the public health officials in Oregon, and now Dr. Fauci even yesterday talked about maybe seasonal masks in the future. I know this drives Mrs. Ehrlich crazy, so I'm going to give you the stage right now.
You know, being here in Florida, no one has a mask outside. I went to a gym, asked what the rules were. No more masks in gym. Didn't take my temperature. Now, some of the people in the gym were using a mask. No one outside, no one on the beach, no one walking around is wearing a mask. And that is a sign of a state led by a strong Republican and many Republicans within the state. I think in the Northeast, fear will remain for a longer time.
And a function of political climate, quite frankly. So it's just fascinating to see Dr. Fauci again all over the board, but clearly there is a thought among some in the public health community, particularly on the left in America, that masks are not going to be remnants of the past, even in the future. Dr. Fauci said...
I think masks are a way of control.
Yes.
And the left wants more control and the right wants less control.
That boils it down. I was just going to say, Dr. Fauci said, well, the flu is down this year because of mask wearing, and you could certainly take that to the nth degree. We could all stay home every day and not produce anything and be not very healthy, I guess. But it is this very interesting cultural mark these days. Second, election process and procedures. In H.R. 1, we saw the left's response to the election of Donald J. Trump in 2016 and what occurred in 2020, an unconstitutional attack on the states, an unconstitutional attack on federalism, according to us on the right, represented in H.R. 1. And I was just thinking, I'd love just to take a poll and try to just eliminate everything that's happened in the last couple of years with regard to election process and procedure and just run a couple notions by the average person. My first observation would be, do you have a problem with photo ID, since you have to have photo ID for everything in this world? Second, do you have a problem with matching signatures on absentee ballots? Shouldn't you have the same signature on the outside as you do on the inside? And by the way, I have no problem with going to no excuse absentee ballots. People don't need an excuse. Okay, fine. You want to vote absentee? You don't want to go to the polls? Fine. You don't have to have an excuse in my side world here I'm talking about. And then the number of days for voting. We've gone from election day to election days to election week, now election month. There needs to be some sort of just compromise. Election week is, I guess, fine with me. Do you need 17, 20, 25 days to vote? I don't think so. It degrades the whole notion of election day. So, again, we're getting away from what worked pretty well in the past. There was a lot of mail-in ballots, a lot of questions about mail-in ballots this past time. But the bottom line to a lot of this is that I see no problem, and I think the majority of people would see no problem with photo ID and matching signature requirements. Your thoughts, Mrs. Ehrlich?
I agree totally. I think it's very common sense. I think most will agree, but again, that will cut very party line, where the far left wants to control. Some might argue, steal, elections, or at least have a strong influence in elections. Here we are in 2021 in the United States of America, and we still don't have consistent election laws. So I think that cuts party line as well.
I agree. It's crazy. Third theme, immigration. All are welcome. We've talked about this. We've talked about it every week, just about every show. We're not going to beat it again this week, but it seems to us, at least, that the Biden administration came in and said, everything that's working, we're going to undo. If Trump did it, we're going to undo it, regardless of consequences, regardless of repercussions, and that's precisely what's occurred. Unaccompanied minors have been encouraged to come to the border. They've gutted ICE. They've stopped the wall construction. They've resumed catch and release. They pretend there's no crisis, and they discourage media coverage of what is really a crisis, according to Republicans and Democrats on the southern border. And the result is, as you would expect, many thousands of unaccompanied minors. These kids are really in a bad place and being mistreated again. Again, the return of catch and release, the overturning of stay in Mexico, which was working, a diplomatic success of the Trump administration and the Trump era, and overburdened and depressed Border Patrol. Theme 3, my dear, seems to be pretty clear-cut, and it's going to be up to the American people in about a year and a half to make their views known on all are welcome regardless of consequences.
I think that the flight from California, from Arizona, from those states that are affected, will show and will influence that issue as well.
Agreed.
Not to mention the criminal element that is entering all those areas and those states, which is horrific. And God bless all of our Border Patrol and first line responders that are really putting their lives literally on the line every day for all of us.
And you've talked about the sex trafficking and the drugs and the fentanyl and the whole 9 yards. Fourth theme, speech at risk. Censorship being encouraged in the United States of America. And this censorship is no problem on campus. It's no problem with big tech. It's no problem with a suddenly woke business community We've always been huge First Amendment people. Before we met, we talked about speech a lot. You loving the criminal justice system and speech and the system and the process, the way it's supposed to work.
Just with speech on college campuses, I think that there's going to be some pushback. And the COVID world has made us look at college campuses and higher education a little differently. So maybe there it will be some influence in that regard.
Next, civil rights. And we need to devote a show to this potentially, babe, but people gloss over these terms as though everybody is on the same page concerning definition, because we've gone from equality to equity overnight. And you see it on the commercials. You see corporate America, equity, equity, equity. Nobody's talking about equality. And those of us of a certain generation, older than 25 probably, view the struggle for civil rights, the civil rights movement, all the progress that's occurred over the last 40, 50, 60, 70 years as a function of the fight for equality, following Dr. King's admonition. What counts is character, nothing else. The character is the denominator. That's how you should judge people. So we've kind of crossed definitions here between equality, which, and by the way, we fell very short at the beginning of this country. We fell very short during the time of slavery and Jim Crow. We all know that. But equality being the goal, and presidents such as Lincoln and Johnson, and you name it, I'll start the list, but political leaders emerging and others emerging, the civil rights movement emerging, and Dr. King emerging, and so many white and black people and brown people coming together with regard to the notion of equality.
Well, let me just say that with equality is equal opportunity.
Yeah.
And with equity, there is pushback. I'm going to be the optimist today, and I am going to remind folks that are listening that there has been pushback on this. Various corporations, there's been pushback in their equity hiring policies that they rushed to implement without really thinking through that information. So as a result, I think there is pushback. And again, that will be reflective in the elections in 2022 and then 2024. And I think that the themes you have and the listing that you have today, we have to recognize that pushback is going to happen. It's already started. And by 2022 and then 2024, hopefully it will really be our way.
Next theme, a turn toward miscreants in the world, a turn away from traditional allies such as Israel, and a turn toward China, the Palestinians, Iran. It is something that, again, was debated, discussed during the course of the campaign. Nobody can claim surprise or ignorance that this is the return of the Obama administration foreign policy, but it is a very sharp turn, again, away from Trump. If Trump did it, we're going to undo it. If Trump did it, we're going to reject it for the most part in the foreign policy realm. And sort of left unspoken, but maybe not so very much, was the notion during the Trump era that as the left said he was crazy, our enemies thought he might be crazy too. Just the way our enemies thought Ronald Reagan could be crazy. And there's some good in that. There's a lot of good in that. When your enemies are fearful, your enemies need to be somewhat fearful of you. And they were certainly fearful of Donald Trump, much less so with regard to Joe Biden.
So what's interesting happening today was a cyber attack on our pipeline.
Yep.
And that shows just how vulnerable we are and just how the miscreants out there who are not for us know it.
Allegedly, this is from Russia, allegedly.
And I know that there's investigation going on, and but it's going to affect us for a period of time until they can correct it. And we are showing more and more to the rest of the world that we are very vulnerable because we're obsessed with equity and racism and not protecting our country. So that is going to be a very real issue coming up. And when people don't feel secure and when mothers don't feel secure, well, we just had Mother's Day. Thanks for all the kudos. But when mothers don't feel secure in their country raising their children, that's a problem.
Speaking of not feeling secure, next issue, defund the police and all sorts of anti-police narratives that the left, the progressive left, has been pushing now for a long time. But since the Floyd murder, these narratives have come first and foremost and are being repeated by the national press. I was listening to the news today. No surprise to anyone, violent crime spiking, huge spikes in our major cities as a function of what? The defund police movement. This is cause and effect. Nobody should be surprised. It was expected. The politicians will start their hand wringing, but again, is anybody really surprised by this? That we have this serious crime wave in our country as a function of all this anti-police rhetoric. And by the way, it's law enforcement week in the country today, and I'm sending a tweet out to that effect because you've dealt with police at various levels in your career, particularly as a public defender and a prosecutor. I've dealt with police as a member of Congress, member of state legislature. We dealt with the executive protection detail that we were very close to as governor. I was blessed to have extraordinarily strong, capable police chiefs in my various police agencies as governor. We know there are bad apples in police as there are in other professions, every other profession, but we also know we've seen the best and the brightest in our police agencies in our tenure in public office.
Well, there is a very real example of this going on today. Corporal Keith Heacock was buried today after he was beaten by a criminal, beaten to death by a criminal, a long career history in the criminal justice system. And that is the 117th line of duty death this year. And we're only to May. So this corporal was fantastic in the Delmarva area. He took care of those citizens, and to think that he's probably a dad and a husband, and all those people have suffered because a criminal, and I don't know all the particulars, whether he was out on something else but he certainly wasn't locked up, probably where he needed to be. And we've talked about how this era is very pro-criminal and the victims get lost. And our hearts and our prayers go out to that corporal's family today.
Well said, Mrs. Ehrlich. Next theme, spend. Spend and spend some more and spend till you drop. And then when you get tired of spending, spend a little more. We've gone through 1.9 trillion. The president wants to spend another 4 trillion. We've seen the great evil, inflation now. We've seen it rekindled. We've seen the price of consumer goods skyrocket in the last couple of weeks. By the way, get gas today, babe, before tomorrow.
I heard.
The cost of lumber, construction materials, new housing, everything is increasing dramatically. And there seems to be very little interest in Washington, D.C. with respect to the real evil of inflation, with respect to the evil of tremendous overspending. And I've made this point in the past. I made it last show. The Republicans do not have the high ground here. We laughed about and I use this in speeches all the time, Republicans are the party of big government, Democrats are the party of really, really big government. Well, progressives are the party of gigantic government, absolutely gigantic government. And forget the firewalls. Forget the discipline. Forget the budget. Forget the budget deficit. Forget fiscal restraint. And we live in that era. It's a real problem. Our children or grandchildren, again a cliche, but nevertheless true, are going to pay a huge price for our spending today. Mrs. Ehrlich, your thoughts?
Well, I just couldn't agree more. Whenever they talk about spending bills and increasing, I will tell you that, again, many of the governors in red states are now pulling back on their unemployment benefits because they can't get people back to work.
Good point.
So, in that regard, again, back to my theme for this show, pushback. Those governors are saying, okay, well, we need our workforce to get back. And that too cuts by party line. And as you and I, a week ago, driving through the district, thought to ourselves, when is the federal government going to get back to work? When is there going to be a demand for people to come in face to face? And the economy of the town of DC, New York, large commuter towns. So again, the pushback regarding that spend, at least is happening in some of those red states to maintain those economies.
Yeah, the more you shut down, the less economic activity you have, the less tax revenue government in turn has to spend. It's not that complicated, and you just can't keep printing money at the federal level. Governors can't do it. The feds can and have, and we're going to pay an awful price. And we're talking about issues such as student loan forgiveness and, as you said, babe, the unemployment extension, which has resulted in more unemployment. President Biden's proposed more spending than any previous president ever. There has to be, again, a bottom line to this, but both parties are at fault. Today, progressives are in control. They just don't care until the American people are going to make them care. Next, disregard for the working class, a favorite theme of mine these days as I do interviews and speeches. The first thing the president did, President Biden, was shut down the Keystone Pipeline. The second thing he did was suspend gas leases. We see the lowering of academic standards. We see progressive indoctrination in public schools. We see religious liberty treated as immoral bigotry. All attacks on America's working class. The elites knew and know where the Trump support was, where the Republican Party, quite frankly, is going. That working class that used to be part of the grassroots of the Democratic Party, but no more, as the Democratic Party has become bi-coastal and elite-driven, and certainly progressive-driven. So we have all these different cross-currents in American culture, all tending to push the working class down. And from Washington, from the media elite centers, no new sympathetic portrayals of Appalachia from the New York Times. Trust me, working class America is left behind in this era. So you're not going to see any of those, what had become actually regular fare in the media concerning beaten down working class areas, neighborhoods, factories, etc. in the past. So this is part of a cultural theme, unfortunately, adopted by progressives in control of this country, and it's a real problem for working class America today.
Well, the pushback on the working class aspect is it's only going to get worse for the working class. We're going to have higher gas prices. The Appalachian area is going to still have lots of unemployment, high opioid use. There are things that are going to get worse and worse for that area without having representation in Washington, by Washington, not by the mainstream media, none of that. So as a result, again, I think that there will be major pushback. Hopefully those people that might have been offended by Trump this last time around, unfortunately things might get so bad for them that they recognize that he had an agenda that actually was for them and for the working class. So,
well, you know, those clingers to their Bibles and guns, those clingers to those Bibles and guns, they're not going to get a whole lot of empathy these days from Washington, D.C.
No, they are not. So that is going to hopefully force them to get out and will motivate them to get out to the polls.
So just a number of the themes that we have seen over the past 110 days now from the Biden administration. And I wanted to give a sort of denominator. This show is called The Bottom Line. And babe, I think the denominator from the left is, and you hear this phrase and you know it drives me crazy, the new normal. Every
What is
ounce
that?
of energy, well, it's what they want it to be, but it's certainly not normal. But they want it to be the new normal. The masking, obviously, part of it. But I want to get into the real quickly here. I came up with a number of the constituent elements of what I see as the new normal, sort of boiling down what we've just talked about the last two shows into some bottom lines, what for them is the new normal. And the first of the new normal is, and I'll just run through them, babe. You can comment when I finish here. Viewing America as an inherently racist place. America first, no longer America somewhere in the middle. That's just what they say. School children subject to indoctrination rather than teaching in our public schools. New progressive courses of indoctrination in our public schools is a new cultural front, and it's going to be very ugly going forward. The denigration of constitutional protections, particularly the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and the 10th Amendment. According to the left, they need to be limited. They need to be redefined according to this quote-unquote new normal. Again, religious freedom is seen as a cover for intolerance. The working class, we talked about this a second ago, marginalized, no longer celebrated in America. Climate as akin to a religion, not a set of public policy principles, but more akin to religious orientation. Capitalism slowly degraded in favor of a soft sort of Western European socialism. Authoritarianism, particularly in executives, to be vested with extraordinary powers when they want it. And finally, the American dream at an inflection point, because what we've talked about is if America is so racist, is so ugly, is so negative, why have an American dream? If the American dream is you want to, as a working class parent, make sure your kids climb into middle class, or a middle class parent, make sure your kids climb into whatever it happens to be, the American dream going forward, doing better than the previous generation, taking advantage of all this freedom. If the country is so inherently bad, why have an American dream? Why celebrate assimilation into a racist melting pot? That's the new normal, and it's a real problem. Mrs. Ehrlich.
Right. Why does everybody want to come here if it's so terrible? And if it's so terrible, just leave. I hate to be that blunt, but seriously.
They never do. When we win, they never do. They threaten.
America is so bad, need to travel more and go to some really, really difficult places to live, especially for women, by the way. I, again, am going to be Miss Pushback this episode. I don't think they're going to be successful in convincing people we're inherently racist. Thankfully, many African Americans are speaking up against that, thankfully. And the more that do, the better that will be. I don't think that indoctrinating children is going to fly. Most people want to raise their own children with their values, want less government, do not want that indoctrination. And to the extent the public school system continues on the way it is, competition is the only way to fight that. Catholic schools may come back. Religious schools may come back as a result of that. This country is not buying that. This country also is not going to buy taking away religious freedom. It was built on religious freedom.
Not according to the 1619
Project. Let's get our history
project.
out there. Let's teach history.
Yeah.
Real history, not made up history. And so I think, and America was built on the working class, the ability to have your own business, and the ability and the freedom to do that. So I am going to remain optimistic that the more that happens, the more there will be a comparison to the Trump era policies. I mean, we have a real comparison of something that was really working in our economy, in the support of our working class, in the support of parents, And of course, it was not inherently racist. That was just a drum that was beat for 4 years.
And I'm going to add an element here. I saw an interview last night. I forgot what show it was, but it was terrific. It was an historian, an academic, stepping forward with, I'm sure probably not a Republican, but stepping forward to challenge this progressive narrative, just talking about actual history, real history. You know, the whole idea of a liberal arts education is to teach kids what happened, and then they can come up with their own perspective on what happened. You can have your own opinion. You can have your own facts, that old political deal. But this is history. You just can't make up it. You can't reinvent history. What happened 200, 300, 400 years ago in the year 2021 can't happen. Parents can't, as you said, parents can't allow it to happen. The American public cannot allow it to happen. But babe, it's happening today in school districts across our country. Parents need to act. It's not just coming out with different schools or going to Catholic school or private schools or some folks showing up at school board meetings. It's becoming very active in taking this movement on. This movement has made a lot of progress over the past couple of years, and they're real serious, again, about creating a new normal. It's a new normal that a lot of Americans want no part of. So, again, we appreciate you listening this week to some thoughts from the Ehrlichs, as Mrs. Ehrlich is in the state of Florida, and the former governor of Maryland is in the state of Maryland.
And we want to hear from you at earl_bottomline, at Bob_Ehrlich, and at Kendel Ehrlich. So thanks for listening, everybody.